In 1938, the MGM Film Studio covers a massive 180 acres. It's a small city, and it's ruled by Louis B. Mayer, a man known for his unrelenting quest to make MGM the biggest and best film studio in the world.
The Wizard of Oz is a unique entity. As great as those MGM musicals were, it's a step beyond.
It was very carefully thought out. It was incredibly ingenious in the way that they put it together.
That's a landmark achievement. That is an absolute landmark achievement.
But even for MGM, The Wizard of Oz was a monumental gamble.
There was no template. You couldn't look back historically and say, look, here's a fantasy movie that was done in color with these big stars playing fantasy characters. You didn't have that to aspire to, so it was more of a gut-level decision to move forward with this project.
For Louis B. Mayer, The Wizard of Oz was a chance to demonstrate that MGM was the master of worlds, both real and imagined. In modern film studios, most people on the lot are hired for a single film. During the studio era, most everyone's an employee.
The directors were under contract, the cinematographers, the art department, the sound people. It was endless. I mean, people spent their entire careers at one studio.
And they had great staffs of composers, and they had great staffs of orchestrators.
The MGM Orchestra was just one of many dedicated staff orchestras that existed for every single studio. There were hundreds and hundreds of great musicians, but Metro was always determined to have the best of the best.
Each studio had a workroom and a craft shop and people who made wonderful jewelry, who did it, you know, time after time.
So all the major studios had a power company on the lot where they transformed very high voltage current they got from, in this case, probably Hoover Dam.
The thing with a timeless movie like The Wizard of Oz is that it is a product of its time.
In those days, we wore coats and ties or suits, you know, and nowadays you've got to look like you're shot out of a cannon to be in this business. Otherwise, they think you're going to a funeral, you know.
In 1937, at a time when a steak dinner costs 75 cents, Arthur Freed is one of Hollywood's best-paid songwriters. Then Freed takes a supreme gamble. He convinces Louis B. Mayer to make him an apprentice producer, taking an 80% cut in pay. When the rights to The Wizard of Oz are purchased by the studio, Freed knows the musical can make his new career or break it.
He was made assistant producer, uncredited, on The Wizard of Oz, and the one decision that was solely his was the ability to choose who was to write the score for The Wizard of Oz. Now, this was a plum project. The Wizard of Oz was being made as an answer to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and everybody in Hollywood wanted a job working on that film, and especially the songwriters.
Freed can play it safe. Instead, he shoots for the moon. He hires a pair of New York songwriters, Yip Harburg and Harold Arlen. On Broadway, their style of using rhyming lyrics and music to tell a story has proven highly successful.
Integrated dialogue and music. That device had not worked well in Hollywood, and it was considered box office death and was considered too sophisticated for the public.
On May 19th, 1938, Yip Harburg and Harold Arlen are given a bungalow and 14 weeks to make movie history.
That you dare to dream really do come true.
And she
she opens the film with Over the Rainbow, and you hear that sound. It's just so beautiful.
When she recorded those takes of singing the Over the Rainbow song, which incidentally was almost cut from the film, that people stood around and wept.
She's right there, in tune. There's no big vibrato. There's no worn out sound. Nothing. It's one of the great pop voices in history, and the song is perfect, absolutely perfect for the picture. It's
Arlen was a remarkable melodist, fresh, inventive, and his harmonies are unique.
Much of the credit for adapting Harburg and Arlen's music into recurring motifs falls on the shoulders of MGM orchestrator George Bassman.
He took a little bit of the accompaniment in If I Only Had a Brain and turned it into a whole piece. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-da.
George Bassman was able to take that secondary motif and develop that as the Tin Man's dance music.
He just took that phrase and played with it, turned it all different ways, and he was so proud of having done that.
If you just look at the Tin Man without music, you can see that he's really not made out of tin. It's kind of a metallic colored cardboard suit that this guy's wearing, and it's a little bit silly, but he used anvils and wood blocks and muted brass to accompany the dance of the Tin Woodsman, and especially when his pipe situation blows smoke, and it beep, beep.
Another aspect of the music comes from classic musical pieces that were integrated into the underscore.
Sound hadn't been around that long, and the era of the silent films used a lot of classical music, so it's quite common, actually, to use classical themes, classical music in films of that time.
The choice to use a bit of Mussorgsky in the Witch's Castle, it gave an appropriate sense of menace to the audience while still connecting them to something that they most likely would have recognized.
You knew instantly that the bicycle riding school farm was the witch just because of the way the music was used.
When you saw that evil witch flying on her broom and everything, you were dum-da-dum-da-dum.
If they had made another choice, suddenly the winged monkeys would no longer be menacing. They would be, like little puppy dogs or something like that.
One key element in the musical success of The Wizard of Oz is the application of a breakthrough technology, lip syncing.
One, two, three, four. Oh, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
In 1938, MGM had developed a very complex system of recording and shooting musicals with overdubs and multi-tracking, and most interestingly, pre-recording. All the actors would listen to it on a playback and synchronize their lip motions, and they're dancing to the pre-recorded music.
The sync is pretty good on it. The Lion, he's a little soft every now and again. But Dorothy, Judy Garland was just incredible with her sync.
But for those whose task it was to create the places in the book, getting it wrong is a very real possibility.
People will go to the movie with an expectation of what they think it should be, and it's an imagination that they've had in their heads since they read the book. And as a filmmaker, you've got to try to meet this invisible threshold.
Now you could do it with all these visual effects, but I guarantee you they'd probably overdo it. And you certainly couldn't do a magical book like that in a movie at that time. It couldn't be done.
I am Oz, the great and powerful.
L. Frank Baum's writing and W. W. Denslow's illustrations provide only a general guide to places and props that would now have to be designed, drawn, built and decorated for the camera. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked about her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderful sights she saw. Deciding what those sights are and how they should look is largely left to the imagination until filming in Munchkinland begins in 1938.
The little people who live in this land, it's Munchkinland, and you are their national heroine, my dear. It's all right. You may all come out and thank her.
To mobilize a film of this size in such a relative short amount of time, now you might have a year of pre-production on a film this elaborate, and they did everything in 18 months.
In building Munchkinland, the artists drew inspiration from their own childhoods, designing mushroom shapes for the houses and a lollipop-like swirl for the start of the yellow brick road.
Special features like weird trees, you love getting that in a script because that gives you a chance to use your artistic abilities.
Ouch!
What do you think you're doing?
The simple tools that you have is your brain and your wrist and a pencil. Pretty soon out of a few scratches comes a big castle.
Her castle was very interesting to me. When I saw her fly out of her turret, I thought, oh, how very Darth Vader this is. It's very gray, it's very stoic, abstract expressionist.
When I was on the set of Lord of the Rings and we were outside of this city, I had this distinct impression because of these gargoyles who were outside guarding the bridge, and something about the rock formations and the set, it really brought me back to The Wizard of Oz.
In 1938, MGM is ideally suited to the demands of bringing The Wizard of Oz to the screen. The art department is the envy of other studios.
We had about 7 or 8 draftsmen at Paramount. I think they had 40 at MGM. So that was the difference,
It was a complete architectural plant, from the designer to the draftsman to the mill to the stage. So it was a factory process of talented people that could take any subject, design it, and build it, and see it erected on the stage in a way that could be shot by a cinematographer.
You knew everybody on the lot then, producers, directors, and then you had all the shops on the lot, from hardware to paint, and it was fantastic.
It had to have been a wonderful way to design because you could really see it all coming together in one place. Everybody gets ideas and feeds off each other creatively. And you see an architectural detail that's gone into a building and you kind of go, oh, that'd be a great hat.
MGM's art department's led by a meticulous artist who will earn 11 Oscars in his lifetime. Cedric Gibbons. The 60 sets that'll become Oz are overseen by his assistant, William Horning.
William Horning was a strict architectural designer. He would look at every drawing and make sure that the 1/8 scale matched the 1/4 scale, matched the 3/4 scale size drawings. So when they got down to the mill and carpenters started reading those drawings, they matched. So it really was an architectural firm with a artistic touch.
Complicating Horning's task is the fact that every scene in the film will be shot indoors. But no stage is large enough to create the massive cornfield where Dorothy meets the Scarecrow. This is accomplished through some masterful painting on an enormous backdrop, 25 feet high and 400 feet long.
George Gibson, that handled their scenic department, was himself one of the fine watercolorists in this country. He didn't see the big canvas of a backing as just that. It was another enlarged fine art painting.
If you look close enough, you can see the painting and whatnot. But it's okay because there's a combination of a theatrical approach to making that movie and a cinematic approach.
It takes Gibson and 12 fellow artists 3 weeks to paint the cornfield. But many scenes require an even larger vista. In contrast to the cornfield backdrop, the road that stretches into the distance is actually less than 5 feet long. Known as a matte painting, this is just one of many that were used to spectacular effect in the film.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Just like I knew it would be.
Let's hurry.
Yes, Hansbrock!
If you look at the costumes of Wizard of Oz, you know exactly what that movie is. One is straw, one is tin, one is a lion, and you accept it totally. I don't think you question that there's somebody inside going, you know. Ray Bolger, when he danced, you didn't feel he had a bone in his body. And that is the success of the Scarecrow costume. It has a feeling of nothing inside except straw.
Well, the Cowardly Lion Witch was always one of my favorite characters, and makeups. Played by Burt Lahr, and the makeup was applied by Charlie Schramm. And apparently, Burt Lahr was one of those kind of neurotic actors. He would only have a certain amount of time that he would allow them to do the makeup in, and even if he got there early, he wouldn't sit in the chair until 6 o'clock. But it makes that makeup even that much better to know that you could actually do it on somebody that kind of fights you along the way.
Put 'em up, put 'em up!
And the suit that he wore was actually apparently a lion skin, a tanned lion skin that was, you know, re-sewn together in a way to make a suit, which I'm sure was quite hot and uncomfortable for him. Jack Haley in the Tin Man makeup wasn't any piece of cake to wear either. I mean, from what I understand, you couldn't sit down in that costume, and it was, you know, made of leather and buckram or something, and it had to be kind of stiff and awkward to have those arms like that and the legs and to not be able to sit.
Did that hurt?
As a rule, usually we'll bitch and moan about having to do something like that, you know. But like I said, where I think the torture comes in is on a day-to-day basis to have to go through this procedure, and the time it takes to put it on. You come in that much earlier in the morning. It takes time to get it off and remove it properly. We still have skin at the end of the day.
Among Hollywood's most renowned costume designers is MGM's Adrian. His largest design challenge is creating the clothing worn by Oz's smallest inhabitants.
He understood scale for the Munchkins. By making everything larger, made them smaller. He gave them proportions of their costumes that dwarfed their heights.
Today that everyone would be freaking out that you had to make 500 hats, 500 pair of shoes, 85 pair of stockings one color, 85 pairs of stockings another color. Oh, you had every kind of munchkin out there. You had a whole world that you created. It's a difficult kind of proportion to make, and they did an amazing job because they all had integrity as people and as characters, and you totally believed that there was a Munchkin land and you were in it.
Costumes, matte paintings, backdrops, and enormous sets allowed the filmmakers to create a world with epic scope. But what goes inside the world has left the greatest impression.
The way that it portrayed Oz and the vibrant way in which the world came to life. They didn't just try to adapt the book faithfully, they tried to bring a whole extra layer of magic to the storytelling.
One of the most fundamental challenges of The Wizard of Oz is making the impossible look as real as a summer day in Kansas.
The Wizard of Oz was a showcase for invention.
The man in charge of Ozian impossibilities is Arnold Buddy Gillespie, a self-made, self-taught special effects wizard.
Buddy Gillespie, who himself had been an art director way back on the original Ben-Hur.
And he ended up being the trick photography guy just because he was the only one willing to take on the challenge.
Some of Gillespie's illusions proved deceptively simple.
That was actually a true magician's illusion. There's a trap door in the floor. Essentially, she's in the costume, and they open the door, blow a bunch of mist into the air, and she actually falls through the floor, and the costume is left behind.
A far more complex illusion was required to create the twister that devastates the Kansas countryside.
The first part was trying to figure out how to get a tornado that they could photograph, because they were actually going to do it on set in a miniature.
Gillespie and Don Trumbull create a large muslin sock that's moved on a trolley through the set.
There were people underneath actually moving the base of that sock along, and they photographed it with this air blowing out so that the dust sort of softened the edges of the tube, and the tube itself, because of the dynamics of the fabric, had the kind of motion that a tornado should have.
The interior of the tornado that Dorothy sees out her window was created using lighting effects over a painted backdrop.
And then they combined that by shooting the guys in the rowboat and the Wicked Witch on the bicycle and all that stuff. Those were all shot against neutral backgrounds and double exposed.
Now we have computers that create things, and you can copy things digitally and replace something and put something on a frame. You can put it frame after frame after frame if you want.
But in those days, you had to plan it in your head and think about it, and then send it to the laboratories who would actually do it. And you probably wouldn't see it for 2 or 3 weeks after you'd ordered it.
Not so fast! Go away and come back tomorrow.
Instead of a screen, the disembodied head of Oz is projected onto smoke, giving the static figure a life of its own.
I am Oz, the great and powerful.
It's so simple, and it's truly smoke and mirrors, because, in fact, the guy's behind the curtain, and he's...
Think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. Oh.
Today, effects like these would be created using computers. In Gillespie's day, the effects are developed through hands-on experimentation.
The Surrender Dorothy effect, they were shooting up through a glass table, essentially, with a guy with a syringe who was squirting dye or ink or something into it, and then they would blast it with white, opaque water to make it disperse. And that's just absolutely brilliant. You know, at a time when, what do you have? You have what you can go to the hardware store. And even the hardware stores weren't that great then.
The Wizard of Oz is an absolute milestone in visual effects filmmaking. There is ingenious visual effects work and incredible imagination.
Audiences entered the theaters for The Wizard of Oz knowing that a wondrous, colorful world awaited. Instead, they got Kansas.
To do a film that was pure color and yet started in sepia tone, that is an amazing piece of guts to do that.
The way that they decided to use black and white and then have color when Dorothy arrives in Oz, that was flamboyant. It was an imaginative, incredibly clever way to use Technicolor, which even at that time was a very new process.
Technicolor. It would help transform Oz into a brightly colored fantasy. In the words of director Victor Fleming, Munchkinland. It's the most colorful sequence, I believe, that has ever been screened.
It exploded with color. I mean, everything was brilliant and gorgeous, but it was warm and inviting at the same time.
But while Technicolor provides a feast for the eyes, it also became the single biggest challenge to getting the film made.
The Wizard of Oz is a showcase for Technicolor because they specifically named the Emerald City, the Yellow Brick Road, the Ruby Slippers. All this is story material which is told through the color.
Technicolor in those days, it photographed the ruby slippers kind of orange. So some compromise needed to be made, putting perhaps more magenta into the ruby slippers so that they come out red and not orange.
Another key aspect of Harold Rosson's photography requires heavy lifting.
The camera was 500 pounds, and it literally was the size of a refrigerator of that period. When you look at Oz, there are a number of really grand camera moves and crane shots.
You have that feeling of choreography of the people and the camera together, and the camera is floating over them.
You know, moving this 500-pound camera becomes a serious effort.
You've been more trouble to me than you're worth, one way and another.
The rating speed of the film was ASA 8. Which, considering that today we walk around with 400 as our standard, it is just astounding the amount of light it took to deliver the images with the depth of field that they have in this picture.
They had to go back to arc lamps, which they had used in the silent days.
Of course, with all that light comes a lot of heat, and that's further compounding a person in makeup or in costumes, or the poor guys that were in the monkey suits hanging from the grid.
When you think of Burt Lahr in that lion's outfit and all of the hair around him, and Jack Haley in the Tin Man, my heavens, and they had unceasing heat, no air conditioning.
And the arc lamps burned carbon arcs, like a searchlight, and they put out smoke.
And it was only when they'd stop to reload the camera, they'd open the studio doors to clear the smoke from the arc lights out of the studio, and the poor actors would gather near the doorway and hope to get a bit of a breeze on them.
Undeniably difficult, outrageously demanding. Technicolor was a light-sucking, energy-sapping exercise in frustration.
When you see it on the big screen today, you go, haha, glad I don't have to beat that tomorrow.
But when combined with the direction of Victor Fleming and the talent of Harold Rosson, Technicolor did more than simply photograph a fantasy. Oz became Technicolor, and Technicolor became Oz.
How can you not look at that film and be marveled by it, amazed by it?
I was enthralled by the wonderfulness of all his wonder. So I guess that's what I would say if you asked me to sum it up in one word.
This film has had the advantage of being shown time and time again in a way that ingratiated itself with a certain generation who in turn wanted to share it with the next generation.
I mean, I forced my kids to watch Wizard of Oz. You know, I remember my daughter Veronica, when she was 3, I sat there like with tears in my eyes, watching her big eyes just kind of staring at the TV screen and just like soaking this in, you know, and it's just like, you know, I can give this to my daughter. That's something that I love so much, you know.
You think of Dorothy and Ruby's slippers and Toto, and it's just precious.
I had a crush on Judy Garland, but that goes without saying.
Judy Garland was some kind of genius, not only as a singer, but as an actor. And nowhere more on view than in this film.
I think a fabulous, entertaining film, and I think that we need more like that, to be honest with you. It's light-hearted, it's got a moral to it.
And the lesson of The Wizard of Oz is, well, when you think you're lacking something, where do you find it? You look inside.
You can feel the heart and the care that's gone into every frame of that film.
It is a great film and beautifully done, and it'll last forever, you know.
And now, thanks to the restoration that has happened to it, it looks and sounds better than it ever has and will be around for a long time.
Thank you.